An intelligence quotient, or IQ, is a score derived from one of several standardized tests designed to assess human intelligence. The abbreviation IQ was coined by the psychologist William Stern for the German term Intelligenz-quotient, his term for a scoring method for intelligence tests he advocated in a 1912 book. When current IQ tests are developed, the median raw score of the norming sample is defined as IQ 100 and scores each standard deviation up or down are defined as 15 IQ points greater or less, although this was not always so historically. By this definition, approximately 95% of the population scores an IQ between 70 and 130, which is within 2 standard deviations of the mean. IQ scores have been shown to be associated with such factors as morbidity and mortality, parental social status, and, to a substantial degree, biological parental IQ. While the heritability of IQ has been investigated for nearly a century, there is still debate about the significance of heritability estimates and the mechanisms of inheritance. IQ scores are used as predictors of educational achievement, special needs, job performance and income. They are also used to study IQ distributions in populations and the correlations between IQ and other variables. Raw scores on IQ tests for many populations have been rising at an average rate that scales to 3 IQ points per decade since the early 20th century, a phenomenon called the Flynn effect. Investigation of differing patterns of increases in IQ battery subtest scores informs current research on human intelligence. History. Early history. The English statistician Francis Galton made the first attempt at creating a standardized test for rating a person's intelligence. A pioneer of psychometrics and the application of statistical methods to the study of human diversity and the heritability of intelligence, he believed that intelligence was largely a product of heredity. He hypothesized that there should exist a correlation between intelligence and other desirable traits like good reflexes, muscle grip, and head size. He set up the first mental testing center in the world in 1882 and he published Inquiries into Human Faculty and its Development in 1883, in which he set out his theories. After gathering data on a variety of physical variables, he was unable to show any such correlation, and he eventually abandoned this research. French psychologist Alfred Binet, together with Victor Henry and Thar copywriter Odor Simon had more success in 1905, when they published the Binet-Simon test in 1905, which focused on verbal abilities. It was intended to identify mental retardation in school children, but in specific contradistinction to claims made by psychiatrists that these children were sick, and should therefore be removed from school and cared for in asylums. The score on the Binet-Simon scale would reveal the child's mental age. For example, a 6-year-old child who passed all the tasks usually passed by 6-year-olds but nothing beyond a would have a mental age that matched his chronological age. 6.0 Binet thought that intelligence was multifaceted, but came under the control of practical judgment. In Binet's view, there were limitations with the scale and he stressed what he saw as the remarkable diversity of intelligence and the subsequent need to study it using qualitative, as opposed to quantitative, measures. American psychologist Henry H. Goddard published a translation of it in 1910. American psychologist Louis Terman at Stanford University revised the Binet-Simon scale, which resulted in the Stanford-Binet intelligence scales. It became the most popular test in the United States for decades. General factor. The many different kinds of IQ tests use a wide variety of methods. Some tests are visual, some are verbal, some tests only use abstract reasoning problems, and some tests concentrate on arithmetic, spatial imagery, reading, vocabulary, memory or general knowledge. The British psychologist Charles Spearman in 1904 made the first formal factor analysis of correlations between the tests. He observed that children's performance ratings across seemingly unrelated school subjects were positively correlated, and reasoned that these correlations reflected the influence of an underlying general mental ability that entered into performance on all kinds of mental tests. He suggested that all mental performance could be conceptualized in terms of a single general ability factor and a large number of narrow task-specific ability factors. Spearman named it G for general factor, and labeled the smaller, specific factors or abilities for specific areas S. In any collection of IQ tests, by definition the test that best measures G is the one that has the highest correlations with all the others. Most of these G-loaded tests typically involve some form of abstract reasoning. Therefore, Spearman and others have regarded G as the real essence of intelligence. This is an argument still accepted in principle by many psychometricians. Today's factor models of intelligence typically represent cognitive abilities as a three-level hierarchy, where there are a large number of narrow factors at the bottom of the hierarchy, a handful of broad, more general factors at the intermediate level, and at the apex a single factor, referred to as the G factor, which represents the variance common to all cognitive tasks. However, this view is not universally accepted. Other factor analyses of the data, with different results, are possible. Some psychometricians regard G as a statistical artifact. One of the most commonly used measures of G is Raven's progressive matrices, which is a test of visual reasoning. The war years in the United States, during World War I, a way was needed to evaluate and assign recruits. This led to the rapid development of several mental tests. The testing generated controversy and much public debate in the United States. Nonverbal or performance tests were developed for those who could not speak English or were suspected of malingering. After the war, positive publicity on Army psychological testing helped to make psychology a respected field. Subsequently, there was an increase in jobs and funding in psychology in the United States. Group intelligence tests were developed and became widely used in schools and industry. L. Thurstone argued for a model of intelligence that included 7 unrelated factors. While not widely used, it influenced later theories. David Ichtsler produced the first version of his test in 1939. It gradually became more popular and overtook the Binet in the 1960s. It has been revised several times, as is common for IQ tests, to incorporate new research. One explanation is that psychologists and educators wanted more information than the single score from the Binet. Ichtsler's 10-plus subtests provided this. Another is Binet focused on verbal abilities, while the Ichtsler also included nonverbal abilities. The Binet has also been revised several times and is now similar to the Ichtsler in several aspects, but the Ichtsler continues to be the most popular test in the United States. Cattell-Horner-Carroll theory. Raymond Cattell proposed 2 types of cognitive abilities in a revision of Spearman's concept of general intelligence. Fluid intelligence was hypothesized as the ability to solve novel problems by using reasoning, and crystallized intelligence was hypothesized as a knowledge-based ability that was very dependent on education and experience. In addition, fluid intelligence was hypothesized to decline with age, while crystallized intelligence was largely resistant. The theory was almost forgotten, but was revived by his student John L. Horn, who later argued GF and GC were only 2 among several factors, and he eventually identified 9 or 10 broad abilities. The theory continued to be called GF-GC theory. John B. Carroll, after a comprehensive reanalysis of earlier data, proposed the 3-stratum theory, which is a hierarchical model with 3 levels. The bottom stratum consists of narrow abilities that are highly specialized. The second stratum consists of broad abilities. Carroll identified 8 second stratum abilities. Carroll accepted Spearman's concept of general intelligence, for the most part, as a representation of the uppermost, third stratum. More recently, a merging of the GF-GC theory of Cattell and Horn with Carroll's 3-stratum theory has led to the Cattell-Horner-Carroll theory. It has greatly influenced many of the current broad IQ tests. It is argued that this reflects much of what is known about intelligence from research. A hierarchy of factors is used. G is at the top. Under it are 10 broad abilities that in turn are subdivided into 70 narrow abilities. The broad abilities are: fluid intelligence includes the broad ability to reason, form concepts, and solve problems using unfamiliar information or novel procedures. Crystallized intelligence includes the breadth and depth of a person's acquired knowledge, the ability to communicate one's knowledge, and the ability to reason using previously learned experiences or procedures. Quantitative reasoning is the ability to comprehend quantitative concepts and relationships and to manipulate numerical symbols. Reading and writing ability includes basic reading and writing skills. Short-term memory is the ability to apprehend and hold information in immediate awareness, and then use it within a few seconds. Long-term storage and retrieval is the ability to store information and fluently retrieve it later in the process of thinking. Visual processing is the ability to perceive, analyze, synthesize, and think with visual patterns, including the ability to store and recall visual representations. Auditory processing is the ability to analyze, synthesize, and discriminate auditory stimuli, including the ability to process and discriminate speech sounds that may be presented under distorted conditions. Processing speed is the ability to perform automatic cognitive tasks, particularly when measured under pressure to maintain focused attention. Decision reaction time speed reflects the immediacy with which an individual can react to stimuli or a task. See mental chronometry. Modern tests do not necessarily measure all of these broad abilities. For example, GQ and GRW may be seen as measures of school achievement and not IQ. GT may be difficult to measure without special equipment. G was earlier often subdivided into only GF and GC, which were thought to correspond to the nonverbal or performance subtests and verbal subtests in earlier versions of the popular Hiller IQ test. More recent research has shown the situation to be more complex. Modern comprehensive IQ tests no longer give a single score. Although they still give an overall score, they now also give scores for many of these more restricted abilities, identifying particular strengths and weaknesses of an individual. Other theories, J.P. Guilford's structure of intellect model used 3 dimensions which when combined yielded a total of 120 types of intelligence. It was popular in the 1970s and early 1980s, but faded owing to both practical problems and theoretical criticisms. Alexander Lurier's earlier work on neuropsychological processes led to the PASS theory. It argued that only looking at one general factor was inadequate for researchers and clinicians who worked with learning disabilities, attention disorders, intellectual disability, and interventions for such disabilities. The PASS model covers 4 kinds of processes. The planning processes involve decision-making, problem-solving, and performing activities and requires goal-setting and self-monitoring. The attention-arousal process involves selectively attending to a particular stimulus, ignoring distractions, and maintaining vigilance. Simultaneous processing involves the integration of stimuli into a group and requires the observation of relationships. Successive processing involves the integration of stimuli into serial order. The planning and attention arousal components comes from structures located in the frontal lobe, and the simultaneous and successive processes come from structures located in the posterior region of the cortex. It has influenced some recent IQ tests, and been seen as a complement to the Cotellhorn-Carroll theory described above. Current tests. There are a variety of individually administered IQ tests in use in the English-speaking world. The most commonly used individual IQ test series is the Hiller Adult Intelligence Scale for adults and the Hiller Intelligence Scale for children for school-age test takers. Other commonly used individual IQ tests include the current versions of the Stanford Binet, Woodcock-Johnson tests of cognitive abilities, the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children, the Cognitive Assessment System, and the Differential Ability Scales. Approximately 95% of the population have scores within 2 standard deviations of the mean. If one SD is 15 points, as is common in almost all modern tests, then 95% of the population are within a range of 70 to 130 and 98% are below 131. Alternatively, 2/3 of the population have IQ scores within 1 SD of the mean. That is within the range 85–115. IQ scales are ordinally scaled. While one standard deviation is 15 points, and 2 SDs are 30 points, and so on, this does not imply that mental ability is linearly related to IQ, such that IQ 50 means half the cognitive ability of IQ 100. In particular, IQ points are not percentage points. The correlation between IQ test results and achievement test results is about 0.7. Reliability and validity. Psychometricians generally regard IQ test as having high statistical reliability. A high reliability implies that although test takers may have varying scores when taking the same test on differing occasions, and they may have varying scores when taking different IQ tests at the same age, the scores generally agree with one another and across time. Like all statistical quantities, any particular estimate of IQ has an associated standard error that measures uncertainty about the estimate. For modern tests, the standard error of measurement is about 3 points. Clinical psychologists generally regard IQ scores as having sufficient statistical validity for many clinical purposes. Flynn effect. Since the early 20th century, raw scores on IQ tests have increased in most parts of the world. When a new version of an IQ test is normed, the standard scoring is set so performance at the population median results in a score of IQ 100. The phenomenon of rising raw score performance means if test takers are scored by a constant standard scoring rule, IQ test scores have been rising at an average rate of around 3 IQ points per decade. This phenomenon was named the Flynn effect in the book The Bell Curve after James R. Flynn, the author who did the most to bring this phenomenon to the attention of psychologists. Researchers have been exploring the issue of whether the Flynn effect is equally strong on performance of all kinds of IQ test items, whether the effect may have ended in some developed nations, whether there are social subgroup differences in the effect, and what possible causes of the effect might be. Flynn's observations have prompted much new research in psychology and demolished some long-cherished beliefs, and raise a number of other interesting issues along the way. Age. IQ can change to some degree over the course of childhood. However, in one longitudinal study, the mean IQ scores of tests at ages 17 and 18 were correlated at r equals 0.86 with the mean scores of tests at ages 5, 6, and 7 and at r equals 0.96 with the mean scores of tests at ages 11, 12, and 13. For decades practitioners' handbooks and textbooks on IQ testing have reported IQ declines with age after the beginning of adulthood. However, later researchers pointed out this phenomenon is related to the Flynn effect and is in part a cohort effect rather than a true aging effect. A variety of studies of IQ and aging have been conducted since the norming of the first Uchsiller intelligence scale drew attention to IQ differences in different age groups of adults. Current consensus is that fluid intelligence generally declines with age after early adulthood, while crystallized intelligence remains intact. Both cohort effects and practice effects must be controlled to gain accurate data. It is unclear whether any lifestyle intervention can preserve fluid intelligence into older ages. The exact peak age of fluid intelligence or crystallized intelligence remains elusive. Cross-sectional studies usually show that especially fluid intelligence peaks at a relatively young age, while longitudinal data mostly show that intelligence is stable until the mid-adulthood or later. Subsequently, intelligence seems to decline slowly. Genetics and environment. Environmental and genetic factors play a role in determining IQ. Their relative importance has been the subject of much research and debate. Heritability. Heritability is defined as the proportion of variance in a trait which is attributable to genotype within a defined population in a specific environment. A number of points must be considered when interpreting heritability. Heritability measures the proportion of variation in a trait can be attributed to genes, and not the proportion of a trait caused by genes. The value of heritability can change if the impact of environment in the population is substantially altered. A high heritability of a trait does not mean environmental effects, such as learning, are not involved. Since heritability increases during childhood and adolescence, one should be cautious drawing conclusions regarding the role of genetics and environment from studies where the participants are not followed until they are adults. Studies have found the heritability of IQ in adult twins to be 0.7 to 0.8 and in children twins 0.45 in the Western world. It may seem reasonable to expect genetic influences on traits like IQ should become less important as one gains experiences with age. However, the opposite occurs. Heritability measures in infancy are as low as 0.2, around 0.4 in middle childhood, and as high as 0.8 in adulthood. One proposed explanation is that people with different genes tend to reinforce the effects of those genes, for example by seeking out different environments. Debate is ongoing about whether these heritability estimates are too high, owing to inadequate consideration of various factors such as the environment being relatively more important in families with low socioeconomic status, or the effect of the maternal environment. Recent research suggests that molecular genetics of psychology and social science requires approaches that go beyond the examination of candidate genes. Shared family environment. Family members have aspects of environments in common. This shared family environment accounts for 0.25 or 0.35 of the variation in IQ in childhood. By late adolescence, it is quite low. The effect for several other psychological traits is similar. These studies have not looked at the effects of extreme environments, such as in abusive families. Non-shared family environment and environment outside the family. Although parents treat their children differently, such differential treatment explains only a small amount of non-shared environmental influence. One suggestion is that children react differently to the same environment because of different genes. More likely influences may be the impact of peers and other experiences outside the family. Individual genes. A very large proportion of the over 17,000 human genes are thought to have an effect on the development and functionality of the brain. While a number of individual genes have been reported to be associated with IQ, none have a strong effect. Deary and colleagues reported that no finding of a strong gene effect on IQ has been replicated. Most reported associations of genes with intelligence are false positive results. Recent findings of gene associations with normally varying intelligence differences in adults continue to show weak effects for any one gene. Likewise in children. Gene-environment interaction. David Rowe reported an interaction of genetic effects with socioeconomic status, such that the heritability was high in high SES families, but much lower in low SES families. This has been replicated in infants, children and adolescents in the U.S., though not outside the U.S., for instance a reverse result was reported in the UK. Dickens and Flynn have argued that genes for high IQ initiate environment-shaping feedback, as genetic effects cause bright children to seek out more stimulating environments that further increase IQ. In their model, environment effects decay over time. The Flynn effect can be explained by a generally more stimulating environment for all people. The authors suggest that programs aiming to increase IQ would be most likely to produce long-term IQ gains if they caused children to persist in seeking out cognitively demanding experiences. Interventions. In general, educational interventions, as those described below, have shown short-term effects on IQ, but long-term follow-up is often missing. For example, in the U.S. very large intervention programs such as the Head Start program have not produced lasting gains in IQ scores. More intensive, but much smaller projects such as the Abecedarian project have reported lasting effects, often on socioeconomic status variables, rather than IQ. A placebo-controlled double-blind experiment found that vegetarians who took 5 grams of creatine per day for 6 weeks showed a significant improvement on 2 separate tests of fluid intelligence, Raven's progressive matrices, and the backward digit span test from the WAIS. The treatment group was able to repeat longer sequences of numbers from memory and had higher overall IQ scores than the control group. The researchers concluded that supplementation with creatine significantly increased intelligence compared with placebo. A subsequent study found that creatine supplements improved cognitive ability in the elderly. However, a study on young adults failed to find any improvements. Recent studies have shown that training and using one's working memory may increase IQ. A study on young adults published in April 2008 by a team from the Universities of Michigan and Bern supports the possibility of the transfer of fluid intelligence from specifically designed working memory training. Further research will be needed to determine nature, extent and duration of the proposed transfer. Among other questions, it remains to be seen whether the results extend to other kinds of fluid intelligence tests than the matrix test used in the study, and if so, whether, after training, fluid intelligence measures retain their correlation with educational and occupational achievement, or if the value of fluid intelligence for predicting performance on other tasks changes. It is also unclear whether the training is durable of extended periods of time. Musical training in childhood has been found to correlate with higher than average IQ. A 2004 study indicated that 6-year-old children who received musical training had an average increase in IQ of 7.0 points, while children who received alternative training or no training had an average increase in IQ of 4.3 points, as indicated by full-scale IQ. Children were tested using Echsiller Intelligence Scale for Children Euro 3rd edition, Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, and Parent Rating Scale of the Behavioral Assessment System for Children. Listening to classical music was reported to increase IQ, specifically spatial ability. In 1994, Francis Rauscher and Gordon Shaw reported that college students who listened to 10 minutes of Mozart's Sonata for Two Pianos showed an increase in IQ of 8 to 9 points on the spatial subtest on the Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale. The phenomenon was coined the Mozart effect. Multiple attempted replications have shown that this is at best a short-term effect, and is not related to IQ increase. Music lessons. In 2004, Schellenberg devised an experiment to test his hypothesis that music lessons can enhance the IQ of children. He had 144 samples of 6-year-old children which were put into 4 groups. Keyboard lessons, vocal lessons, drama lessons or no lessons at all, for 36 weeks. The sample's IQ was measured both before and after the lessons had taken place using the Echsiller Intelligence Scale for Children Euro 3rd edition, Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, and Parent Rating Scale of the Behavioral Assessment System for Children. All 4 groups had increases in IQ, most likely resulted by the entrance of grade school. The notable difference with the 2 music groups compared to the 2 control groups was a slightly higher increase in IQ. The children in the control groups on average had an increase in IQ of 4.3 points, while the increase in IQ of the music groups was 7.0 points. Though the increases in IQ were not dramatic, one can still conclude that musical lessons do have a positive effect for children, if taken at a young age. It is hypothesized that improvements in IQ occur after musical lessons because the music lessons encourage multiple experiences, which generates progression in a wide range of abilities for the children. Testing this hypothesis, however, has proven difficult. Another test also performed by Schellenberg tested the effects of musical training in adulthood. He had 2 groups of adults, one group whom were musically trained and another group who were not. He administered tests of Intelligenz-quotient and emotional intelligence to the trained and non-trained groups and found that the trained participants had an advantage in IQ over the untrained subjects, even with gender, age, environmental issues held constant. The 2 groups, however, score similarly in the emotional intelligence test. The test results show that there is a positive correlation between musical training and IQ, but it is not evident that musical training has a positive effect on emotional intelligence. Brain anatomy. Several neurophysiological factors have been correlated with intelligence in humans, including the ratio of brain weight to body weight and the size, shape and activity level of different parts of the brain. Specific features that may affect IQ include the size and shape of the frontal lobes, the amount of blood and chemical activity in the frontal lobes, the total amount of gray matter in the brain, the overall thickness of the cortex and the glucose metabolic rate. Health. Health is important in understanding differences in IQ test scores and other measures of cognitive ability. Several factors can lead to significant cognitive impairment, particularly if they occurred during pregnancy and childhood when the brain is growing and the blood-brain barrier is less effective. Such impairment may sometimes be permanent, sometimes be partially or wholly compensated for by later growth. Since about 2010, researchers such as Ipig, Hassel and McKenzie have found a very close and consistent link between IQ scores and infectious diseases, especially in the infant and preschool populations and the mothers of these children. They have postulated that fighting infectious diseases strains the child's metabolism and prevents full brain development. Hassel postulated that it is by far the most important factor in determining population IQ. However, they also found that subsequent factors such as good nutrition, regular quality schooling can offset early negative effects to some extent. Developed nations have implemented several health policies regarding nutrients and toxins known to influence cognitive function. These include laws requiring fortification of certain food products and laws establishing safe levels of pollutants. Improvements in nutrition, and in public policy in general, have been implicated in worldwide IQ increases. Cognitive epidemiology is a field of research that examines the associations between intelligence test scores and health. Researchers in the field argue that intelligence measured at an early age is an important predictor of later health and mortality differences. Social outcomes. Intelligence is a better predictor of educational and work success than any other single score. Some measures of educational aptitude are essentially IQ tests. For instance, Frey and Detterman reported a correlation of 0.82 between G and SAT scores. Another research found a correlation of 0.81 between G and GCSE scores, with the explained variance ranging from 58.6% in mathematics and 48% in English to 18.1% in art and design. School performance. The American Psychological Association's report Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns states that wherever it has been studied, children with high scores on tests of intelligence tend to learn more of what is taught in school than their lower-scoring peers. The correlation between IQ scores and grades is about 0.50. This means that the explained variance is 25%. Achieving good grades depends on many factors other than IQ, such as persistence, interest in school, and willingness to study. It has been found IQ correlation with school performance depends on the IQ measurement used. For undergraduate students, the verbal IQ as measured by WAISO has been found to correlate significantly with the GPA of the last 60 hours. In contrast, performance IQ correlation with the same GPA was only 0.22 in the same study. Job performance, according to Schmidt and Hunter, for hiring employees without previous experience in the job, the most valid predictor of future performance is general mental ability. The validity of IQ as a predictor of job performance is above 0 for all work studied to date, but varies with the type of job and across different studies, ranging from 0.2 to 0.6. The correlations were higher when the unreliability of measurement methods was controlled for. While IQ is more strongly correlated with reasoning and less so with motor function, IQ test scores predict performance ratings in all occupations. That said, for highly qualified activities, low IQ scores are more likely to be a barrier to adequate performance, whereas for minimally skilled activities, athletic strength are more likely to influence performance. It is largely through the quicker acquisition of job-relevant knowledge that higher IQ mediates job performance. In establishing a causal direction to the link between IQ and work performance, longitudinal studies by Watkins and others suggest that IQ exerts a causal influence on future academic achievement, whereas academic achievement does not substantially influence future IQ scores. Triona Eileen Rood and Leanne Thompson write that general cognitive ability, but not specific ability scores, predict academic achievement, with the exception that processing speed and spatial ability predict performance on the SAT Math beyond the effect of general cognitive ability. The U.S. military has minimum enlistment standards at about the IQ 85 level. There have been 2 experiments with lowering this to 80, but in both cases these men could not master soldiering well enough to justify their costs. In 2000, the New London, Connecticut Police Department turned away a recruit for having an IQ above 125, under the argument that those with overly high IQs will become bored and exhibit high turnover in the job. This policy has been challenged as discriminatory, but was upheld by the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New York. The American Psychological Association's report Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns states that since the explained variance is 29%, other individual characteristics such as interpersonal skills, aspects of personality etc. are probably of equal or greater importance, but at this point there are no equally reliable instruments to measure them. Income. While it has been suggested that in economic terms it appears that the IQ score measures something with decreasing marginal value. It is important to have enough of it, but having lots and lots does not buy you that much. Large-scale longitudinal studies indicate an increase in IQ translates into an increase in performance at all levels of IQ, that is, that ability and job performance are monotonically linked at all IQ levels. Charles Murray, co-author of The Bell Curve, found that IQ has a substantial effect on income independently of family background. The link from IQ to wealth is much less strong than that from IQ to job performance. Some studies indicate that IQ is unrelated to net worth. The American Psychological Association's 1995 report Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns stated that IQ scores accounted for about a quarter of the social status variance and 1/6 of the income variance. Statistical controls for parental SES eliminate about a quarter of this predictive power. Psychometric intelligence appears as only one of a great many factors that influence social outcomes. Some studies claim that IQ only accounts for 1/6 of the variation in income because many studies are based on young adults, many of whom have not yet reached their peak earning capacity, or even their education. On pg 568 of the G-factor, Arthur Jensen claims that although the correlation between IQ and income averages a moderate 0.4, the relationship increases with age, and peaks at middle age when people have reached their maximum career potential. In the book, A Question of Intelligence, Daniel Sligman cites an IQ-income correlation of 0.5. A 2002 study further examined the impact of non-IQ factors on income and concluded that an individual's location, inherited wealth, race, and schooling are more important as factors in determining income than IQ. Crime. The American Psychological Association's 1995 report Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns stated that the correlation between IQ and crime was a 0.2. It was a 0.19 between IQ scores and number of juvenile offences in a large Danish sample. With social class controlled, the correlation dropped to a 0.17. A correlation of 0.20 means that the explained variance is 4%. It is important to realize that the causal links between psychometric ability and social outcomes may be indirect. Children with poor scholastic performance may feel alienated. Consequently, they may be more likely to engage in delinquent behavior, compared to other children who do well. In his book The G-Factor, Arthur Jensen cited data which showed that, regardless of race, people with IQs between 70 and 90 have higher crime rates than people with IQs below or above this range, with the peak range being between 80 and 90. The 2009 Handbook of Crime Correlates stated that reviews have found that around 8 IQ points, or 0.5 SD, separate criminals from the general population, especially for persistent serious offenders. It has been suggested that this simply reflects that only dumb ones get caught, but there is similarly a negative relation between IQ and self-reported offending. That children with conduct disorder have lower IQ than their peers strongly argues for the theory. A study of the relationship between U.S. county-level IQ and U.S. county-level crime rates found that higher average IQs were associated with lower levels of property crime, burglary, larceny rate, motor vehicle theft, violent crime, robbery, and aggravated assault. These results were not confounded by a measure of concentrated disadvantage that captures the effects of race, poverty, and other social disadvantages of the county. Other correlations, in addition, IQ and its correlation to health, violent crime, gross state product, and government effectiveness are the subject of a 2006 paper in the publication Intelligence. The paper breaks down IQ averages by U.S. states using the federal government's National Assessment of Educational Progress Math and Reading Test scores as a source. The American Psychological Association's 1995 report Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns stated that the correlations for most negative outcome variables are typically smaller than 0.20, which means that the explained variance is less than 4%. Tams al. Found that occupational status, educational attainment, and IQ are individually heritable. and further found that genetic variance influencing educational attainment contributed approximately one-fourth of the genetic variance for occupational status and nearly half the genetic variance for IQ. In a sample of U.S. siblings, Roe et al. Report that the inequality in education and income was predominantly due to genes, with shared environmental factors playing a subordinate role. A recent USA study that reviewed political views and intelligence has shown that the mean adolescent intelligence of young adults who identify themselves as very liberal is 106.4, while that of those who identify themselves as very conservative is 94.8. Two other studies conducted in the UK reached similar conclusions. There are also other correlations such as those between religiosity and intelligence and fertility and intelligence. Real-life accomplishments, there is considerable variation within and overlap among these categories. People with high IQs are found at all levels of education and occupational categories. The biggest difference occurs for low IQs with only an occasional college graduate or professional scoring below 90. Group differences. Among the most controversial issues related to the study of intelligence is the observation that intelligence measures such as IQ scores vary between ethnic and racial groups and sexes. While there is little scholarly debate about the existence of some of these differences, their causes remain highly controversial both within academia and in the public sphere. Sex. Most IQ tests are constructed so that there are no overall score differences between females and males. Popular IQ batteries such as the WAIS and the WISCR are also constructed in order to eliminate sex differences. In a paper presented at the International Society for Intelligence Research in 2002, it was pointed out that because test constructors and the Educational Testing Service often eliminate items showing marked sex differences in order to reduce the perception of bias, the true sex difference is masked. Items like the MRT and RT tests that show a male advantage in IQ are often removed. Race and ethnicity. The 1996 Task Force investigation on intelligence sponsored by the American Psychological Association concluded that there are significant variations in IQ across races. The problem of determining the causes underlying this variation relates to the question of the contributions of nature and nurture to IQ. Psychologists such as Alan S. Kaufman and Nathan Brody and statisticians such as Bernie Devlin argue that there are insufficient data to conclude that this is because of genetic influences. Perhaps the most notable researcher arguing for a strong genetic influence on these average score differences was Arthur Jensen, who restarted the debate in 1969 with his paper, How Much Can We Boost IQ and Scholastic Achievement? But many others, for example Philippe Rushton, Richard Lynn, are also hereditarians. In contrast, other researchers such as Richard Nisbet argue that environmental factors can explain all of the average group differences. Public policy. In the United States, certain public policies and laws regarding military service, education, public benefits, capital punishment, and employment incorporate an individual's IQ into their decisions. However, in the case of Griggs v. Duke Power Company in 1971, for the purpose of minimizing employment practices that disparately impacted racial minorities, the U.S. Supreme Court banned the use of IQ tests in employment, except when linked to job performance via a job analysis. Internationally, certain public policies, such as improving nutrition and prohibiting neurotoxins, have as one of their goals raising, or preventing a decline in, intelligence. A diagnosis of intellectual disability is in part based on the results of IQ testing. Borderline intellectual functioning is a categorization where a person has below-average cognitive ability, but the deficit is not as severe as intellectual disability. In the United Kingdom, the 11+ exam, which incorporated an intelligence test, has been used from 1945 to decide, at 11 years old, which type of school a child should go to. They have been much less used since the widespread introduction of comprehensive schools. Criticism and views, relation with intelligence. IQ is the most researched attempt at measuring intelligence and by far the most widely used in practical setting. However, although IQ attempts to measure some notion of intelligence, it may fail to act as an accurate measure of intelligence in its broadest sense. IQ tests only examine particular areas embodied by the broadest notion of intelligence, failing to account for certain areas which are also associated with intelligence such as creativity or emotional intelligence. There are critics such as Keith Stanovich who do not dispute the stability of IQ test scores or the fact that they predict certain forms of achievement rather effectively. They do argue, however, that to base a concept of intelligence on IQ test scores alone is to ignore many important aspects of mental ability. Criticism of G. Some scientists dispute IQ entirely. In The Mismeasure of Man, paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould criticized IQ tests and argued that they were used for scientific racism. He argued that G was a mathematical artifact and criticized. Arthur Jensen responded. Psychologist Peter Paragraph-Neman was also a persistent critic of IQ, calling it the IQ myth. He argued that G is a flawed theory and that the high heritability estimates of IQ are based on false assumptions. Another significant critic of G as the main measure of human cognitive abilities is Robert Sternberg, who has argued that reducing the concept of intelligence to the measure of G does not fully account for the different skills and knowledge types that produce success in human society. Jensen has rejected the criticism by Gould and also argued that even if G were replaced by a model with several intelligences, this would change the situation less than expected. All tests of cognitive ability would continue to be highly correlated with one another and there would still be a black-white gap on cognitive tests. Test bias. The American Psychological Association's report Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns stated that in the United States IQ tests as predictors of social achievement are not biased against African Americans since they predict future performance, such as school achievement, similarly to the way they predict future performance for Caucasians. Nicholas McIntosh, however, points out that this reasoning only holds if one assumes that schooling is not itself systematically biased against African Americans, and that if this assumption is false, educational performance may in fact also be an underestimation of African American children's cognitive abilities. Hunt points out that while this may be the case, that would not be a bias of the test, but of society. However, IQ tests may well be biased when used in other situations. A 2005 study stated that differential validity in prediction suggests that the WAIS test may contain cultural influences that reduce the validity of the WAIS as a measure of cognitive ability for Mexican American students, indicating a weaker positive correlation relative to sampled white students. Other recent studies have questioned the culture fairness of IQ tests when used in South Africa. Standard intelligence tests, such as the Stanford Binet, are often inappropriate for children with autism. The alternative of using developmental or adaptive skills measures are relatively poor measures of intelligence in autistic children, and may have resulted in incorrect claims that a majority of children with autism are mentally retarded. Outdated methodology. According to a 2006 article by the National Center for Biotechnology Information, contemporary psychological researches often did not reflect substantial recent developments in psychometrics and bears an uncanny resemblance to the psychometric state-of-the-art as it existed in the 1950s. Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns. In response to the controversy surrounding the bell curve, the American Psychological Association's Board of Scientific Affairs established a task force in 1995 to write a report on the state of intelligence research which could be used by all sides as a basis for discussion. Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns. The full text of the report is available through several websites. In this paper, the representatives of the association regret that IQ-related works are frequently written with a view to their political consequences. Research findings were often assessed not so much on their merits or their scientific standing as on their supposed political implications. The task force concluded that IQ scores do have high predictive validity for individual differences in school achievement. They confirm the predictive validity of IQ for adult occupational status, even when variables such as education and family background have been statistically controlled. They stated that individual differences in intelligence are substantially influenced by both genetics and environment. The report stated that a number of biological factors, including malnutrition, exposure to toxic substances, and various prenatal and perinatal stressors, result in lowered psychometric intelligence under at least some conditions. The task force agrees that large differences do exist between the average IQ scores of blacks and whites, saying, the APA journal that published the statement, American Psychologist, subsequently published 11 critical responses in January 1997, several of them arguing that the report failed to examine adequately the evidence for partly genetic explanations. Dynamic assessment, notable and increasingly influential alternative to the wide range of standard IQ tests, originated in the writings of psychologist Lev Vygotsky of his most mature and highly productive period of 1932 to 1934. The notion of the zone of proximal development that he introduced in 1933, roughly a year before his death, served as the banner for his proposal to diagnose development as the level of actual development that can be measured by the child's independent problem-solving and, at the same time, the level of proximal, or potential development that is measured in the situation of moderately assisted problem-solving by the child. The maximum level of complexity and difficulty of the problem that the child is capable to solve under some guidance indicates the level of potential development. Then, the difference between the higher level of potential and the lower level of actual development indicates the zone of proximal development. Combination of the two indexes are the level of actual and the zone of the proximal development according to Vygotsky, provides a significantly more informative indicator of psychological development than the assessment of the level of actual development alone. The ideas on the zone of development were later developed in a number of psychological and educational theories and practices. Most notably, they were developed under the banner of dynamic assessment that focuses on the testing of learning and developmental potential. Grounded in developmental theories of Vygotsky and Feuerstein, who recognized that human beings are not static entities but are always in states of transition and transactional relationships with the world, dynamic assessment received also considerable support in the recent revisions of cognitive developmental theory by Joseph Campion, Anne Brown, and John D. Bransford, and in theories of multiple intelligences by Howard Gardner and Robert Sternberg. Classification. IQ classification is the practice by IQ test publishers of designating IQ score ranges as various categories with labels such as superior, or average. IQ classification was preceded historically by attempts to classify human beings by general ability based on other forms of behavioral observation. Those other forms of behavioral observation are still important for validating classifications based on IQ tests. High IQ societies. There are social organizations, some international, which limit membership to people who have scores as high as or higher than the 98th percentile on some IQ test or equivalent. Mensa International is perhaps the best known of these. There are other groups requiring a score above the 99th percentile. References. Bibliography, Aiken, Lewis. Psychological Testing and Assessment. Boston, Allen and Bacon. ISBN A0-205-06613-5. Aiken, Lewis R. Plenum Press 1996. Assessment of Intellectual Functioning. Perspectives on Individual Differences ed. Springer. ISBN A978-0-306-48431-5. LCCNA 95026038. OCLCA 611331775. American Psychiatric Association. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Arlington, Virginia, American Psychiatric Publishing. ISBN A978-0-89042-555-8. Les Summeria, Anastasie, Anne. Urbina, Susanna. Psychological Testing. Upper Saddle River, Prentice Hall. ISBN A978-0023030857. Les Summeria, Campbell, Jonathan M. Chapter 3, Mental Retardation, Intellectual Disability. In Campbell, Jonathan M. Campos, Randy W. Psychodiagnostic Assessment of Children, Dimensional and Categorical Approaches. Hoboken, Wiley. ISBN A978-0-471-21219-5. Les Summeria, Cox, Catherine M. The Early Mental Traits of 300 Geniuses. Genetic Studies of Genius Volume 2. Stanford, Stanford University Press. Les Summeria, Dumont, Ron. Willis, John O. Elliott, Colin D. Essentials of DASE, Registered Trademark Assessment. Hoboken, New Jersey, Wiley. PA 126. ISBN A978-0470-22520-2. Dumont, Ron. Willis, John O. Range of DAS Subtest Scaled Scores. Dumont Willis. Archived from the original on April 7, 2014. Eysenck, Hans. Genius, The Natural History of Creativity. Problems in the Behavioral Sciences No. 12. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. ISBN A978-0-5-2148508-1. Les Summeria, Eysenck, Hans. Intelligence, A New Look. New Brunswick, Transaction Publishers. ISBN A978-0-7658-0707-6. Carroll, John B. Human Cognitive Abilities, A Survey of Factor Analytic Studies. New York, Cambridge University Press. ISBN A0-521-38275-0. Retrieved May 15, 2014. Flanagan, Dawn P. Harrison, Patty L., eds. Contemporary Intellectual Assessment, Theories, Tests, and Issues. New York, Guilford Press. ISBN A978-1-60918-995-2. Les Summeria, Flanagan, Dawn P. Kaufman, Alan S. Essentials of WISCIV Assessment. Essentials of Psychological Assessment. Hoboken, Wiley. ISBN A978-0470189153. Les Summeria, Flynn, Jonathan. Greenspan, Ralph J. Kendler, Kenneth S. How Genes Influence Behavior. Oxford University Press. ISBN A978-0-19-955990-9. Les Summeria, Flynn, James. Are We Getting Smarter? Rising IQ in the 21st Century. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. ISBN A978-1-107-60917-4. Les Summeria, Frey, Meredith C. Detterman, Douglas K. Scholastic Assessment Org. Psychological Science 15, 373 €8 doi, 10.1111 per Joule 0956-7976.2004.00687X. PMIDA 15147489. Freds, David. Review of Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale, 3rd Revision. In Oscar Burroughs. 7th Mental Measurements Yearbook. Highland Park, Griffin Press PPA 772 €773. Georges, James. Weiss, Lawrence. Band of VIJVER, Funds. Saklovsk, Donald. Preface. In Georges, James. Weiss, Lawrence. Band of VIJVER, Funds. Saklovsk, Donald. Culture and Children's Intelligence, Cross-Cultural Analysis of the WISCII. San Diego, Academic Press PPXVXA EuroXXXII. ISBN A978-0-12-280055-9. Les Summeria, Gottfredson, Linda S. Mainstream Science on Intelligence. Intelligence-24, 13 €23. ISNA 0160-2896. Gottfredson, Linda S., YG Matters, The Complexity of Everyday Life. Intelligence-24, 79 €132 doi, 10.1016 per second 0160-2896, 97, 90014-3. ISNA 0160-2896. Retrieved July 7, 2014. Gottfredson, Linda S. The General Intelligence Factor. Scientific American presents 9, 24 €29. Gottfredson, Linda S. Chapter 9, Suppressing Intelligence Research, Hurting Those We Intend to Help. In Wright, Rogers H. Cummings, Nicholas A. Destructive Trends in Mental Health, The Well-Intentioned Path to Harm. Taylor and Francis PPA 155 €186. ISBN A978-0-203-95622-9. Retrieved July 7, 2014. Les Summeria, Gottfredson, Linda S. Chapter 20, Social Consequences of Group Differences in Cognitive Ability. In Flores Mendoza, Carmen E. Column, Roberto. Introdue Picavolt Pound O of Psychologia das Diferenças Secciones Individuae. Porto Alegre, Brazil, ArtMed publishes PPA 155 €186. ISBN A978-85-363-1418-1. Gottfredson, Linda S. Chapter 1, Logical Fallacies Used to Dismiss the Evidence on Intelligence Testing. In Phelps, Richard F. Correcting Fallacies About Educational and Psychological Testing. Washington, American Psychological Association. ISBN A978-1-4338-0392-5. Les Summeria, Gould, Stephen J. The Mismeasure of Man. New York, W. W. Norton. ISBN A978-0-393-31425-0. Les Summeria, Gregory, Robert J. Classification of Intelligence. In Sternberg, Robert J. Encyclopedia of Human Intelligence 1. Macmillan PPA 260 €266. ISBN A978-0-02-897407-1. OCLCA 29594474. Grath Marnott, Gary. Handbook of Psychological Assessment. Hoboken, Wiley. ISBN A978-0-470-08358-1. Les Summeria, Harris, Judith Rich. The Nurture Assumption, Why Children Turn Out the Way They Do. Free Press. ISBN A978-1-4391-0165-0. Retrieved July 7, 2014. Les Summeria Euroscientific Americana, Hunt, Earl. Multiple Views of Multiple Intelligence. Psych Critiques 46, 5 €7 doi, 10.1037/002513. Hunt, Earl. Human Intelligence. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. ISBN A978-0-521-70781-7. Les Summeria, Jensen, Arthur. A Bias in Mental Testing. New York, Free Press. ISBN A0-02-916430-3. Les Summeria, Jensen, Arthur. Other G Factor, The Science of Mental Ability. Human Evolution, Behavior, and Intelligence. Westport, Praeger. ISBN A978-0-275-96103-9. ISNA 1063-2158. Les Summeria, Jensen, Arthur. Clocking the Mind, Mental Chronometry and Individual Differences. Elsevier. ISBN A978-0-08-044939-5. Retrieved July 7, 2014. Les Summeria Neuropsychology Today. Jensen, Arthur. The Theory of Intelligence and Its Measurement. Intelligence 39, 171 €177 doi, 10.1016/J Intel. 2011.03.004. ISNA 0160-2896. Retrieved August 27, 2013. Johnson, Wendy. Turkheimer, E. Gottsman, Irving. Bouchard, Thomas. Beyond Heritability, Twin Studies in Behavioral Research. Current Directions in Psychological Science 18, 217 Euro 220 doi, 10.1111 per Joule 1467-8721.2009.01639x. PMCA 2,899,491. PMIDA 20,625,474. Retrieved June 29, 2010. Kaufman, Alan S. IQ Testing 101. New York, Springer Publishing. ISBN A978-0-8261-0629-2. Les Sommeria, Kaufman, Alan S. Lichtenberger, Elizabeth O. Assessing Adolescent and Adult Intelligence. Hoboken, Wiley. ISBN A978-0-471-73553-3. Les Sommeria, Kaufman, Scott Barry. Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined. Basic Books. ISBN A978-0-465-02554-1. Retrieved October 1, 2013. Les Sommeria, Lahn, Bruce T. Ebenstein, Lanny. Let's Celebrate Human Genetic Diversity. Nature 461, 726 Euro 728 doi, 10.1038/461726a. ISNA 0028-0836. PMIDA 19812654. Lohman, David F. Foley Nickpan, Megan. Chapter 12, Ability Testing and Talent Identification. In Hunsaker, Scott. Identification, the theory and practice of identifying students for gifted and talented education services. Waco, Prufrock PPA 287 Euro 386. ISBN A978-1-931280-17-4. Les Sommeria, Mackintosh, NJIQ and Human Intelligence. Oxford, Oxford University Press. ISBN A978-0-19-958559-5. Les Sommeria, Matarazzo, Joseph D. Itchsiller's Measurement and Appraisal of Adult Intelligence. Baltimore, Williams and Watkins. Les Sommeria, Mackintosh, David E. Dixon, Felicia A. Pearson, Eric E. Chapter 25, Use of Intelligence Tests in the Identification of Giftedness. In Flanagan, Dawn P. Harrison, Patty L. Contemporary Intellectual Assessment, Theories, Tests, and Issues. New York, Guilford Press PPA 623 Euro 642. ISBN A978-1-60918-995-2. Les Sommeria, Murray, Charles. Income Inequality and IQ. Washington, AEI Press. ISBN A978-0844770949. Retrieved July 7, 2014. Les Sommeria Euro New Republica, Nagleri, Jack A. Essentials of CAS Assessment. Essentials of Psychological Assessment. Hoboken, Wiley. ISBN A978-0-471-29015-5. Les Sommeria, Nisa, Ulrich. Boudou, Gwyneth. Bouchard, Thomas J. Boykin, A. Wade. Brody, Nathan. Ceci, Stephen J. Halpin, Diane F. Llewellyn, John C. Perloff, Robert. Sternberg, Robert J. Urbina, Susanna. Intelligence, Knowns and Unknowns. American Psychologist 51, 77 Euro 101. ISNA 0003-066X. Retrieved July 22, 2013. Noguera, Pedro. A Racial Politics and the Elusive Quest for Excellence and Equity in Education. In Motion magazine. Article ER01093002. Retrieved July 7, 2014. Plummin, Robert. DeFries, John C. Noplik, Valerie S. Niederheiser, Genie and Behavioral Genetics. Sean Purcell. Worth Publishers. ISBN A978-1-4292-4215-8. Retrieved September 4, 2013. Les Sommeria, Stern, William, 1912. Die psychologischen Methoden der Intelligenz pro 1/4 Fung, und deren Anwendung und Schulkindern, The Psychological Methods of Testing Intelligence. Educational Psychology Monographs, No. 13. Guy Montrose Whipple. Baltimore, Warwick and York. LCCNA 14010447. OCLCA 4521857. Retrieved June 15, 2014. Turkheimer, Eric. A Better Way to Use Twins for Developmental Research. Life Newsletter 2, €5. Retrieved October 29, 2010. Urbina, Susanna. Chapter 2, Tests of Intelligence. In Sternberg, Robert J. Kaufman, Scott Barry. The Cambridge Handbook of Intelligence. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press ppA 20 €38. ISBN A9780521739115. Les Sommeria, Ichsler, David. Ichsler Adult Intelligence Scale. San Antonio, The Psychological Corporation. Ichsler, David. Ichsler Intelligence Scale for Children. San Antonio, The Psychological Corporation. Weiner, Irving B. Graham, John R. Naglery, Jack A., Ed's Handbook of Psychology. Volume 10, Assessment Psychology. John Wiley & Sons. ISBN A978-0-470-89127-8. Retrieved November 25, 2013. External links, Classics in the History of Psychology, Human Intelligence, Biographical Profiles, Current Controversies, Resources for Teachers.